Dog leads woman to an abandoned shed. What they found inside shocked the town. The morning sunlight filtered through the trees as Sarah walked her usual path through the wooded outskirts of her small town. She had recently adopted Max, a lively German shepherd with a boundless spirit and an uncanny knack for sniffing out trouble. Their walks had become a daily ritual, a way for Sarah to clear her mind and for Max to burn off his endless energy. On this particular day, however, Max seemed unusually restless. His ears twitched at every sound, his nose constantly to the ground as if following a scent only he could detect. "What's gotten into you, boy?" Sarah asked, tugging gently at the leash. But Max was determined, pulling her toward a narrow, overgrown trail she hadn't noticed before. "All right, let's see what's so interesting," Sarah muttered, giving in to Max's insistence. The trail wound deeper into the woods, the air growing cooler and the sunlight dimming beneath the canopy of leaves. Sarah's unease grew with each step, her sneakers crunching on the dry leaves as she struggled to keep up with Max. He moved with purpose, his tail wagging low and his nose working overtime. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervous laughter. She glanced around, realizing she had ventured far from her usual route. The familiar sounds of the town were replaced by the eerie quiet of the forest, broken only by the occasional rustle of branches. Suddenly Max stopped. His body stiffened, his ears perked, and he let out a low, throaty bark. Ahead of them, barely visible through the dense underbrush, was an old, weathered shed. Its wooden walls were splintered and gray, and the roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. Sarah hesitated, her grip tightening on Max's leash. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, staring at the dilapidated structure. "This is what you dragged me out here for?" Max barked again, this time more urgently, and pulled toward the shed. Sarah's heart raced as she followed him, her curiosity mingling with a sense of foreboding. The shed looked abandoned, its door slightly ajar, revealing nothing but shadows inside. Max whined softly, pawing at the ground near the entrance. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "All right, let's take a look," she said, pushing the door open. The smell hit her first, a musty, earthy scent that hinted at decay and neglect. Inside, the shed was dimly lit, the only light coming from the gaps in the wooden walls. The floor was littered with old tools, rusted metal, and crumpled newspapers. But it wasn't the debris that caught Sarah's attention. In the corner, hidden beneath a pile of tattered blankets, was a faint movement. Max barked again, his tail wagging furiously as he darted toward the corner. Sarah followed, her eyes widening as she realized what she was seeing. It was a small dog, barely more than a puppy, its thin frame trembling with fear. Its matted fur and wide, terrified eyes told a story of abandonment and neglect. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, crouching down. "Hey there, little one. It's okay. You're safe now." Max sniffed the puppy gently, his demeanor calm and reassuring. The smaller dog whimpered, its body curling tighter as Sarah reached out with a steady hand. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're not going to hurt you." As Sarah lifted the puppy into her arms, she noticed something else. A box tucked into the corner, half hidden by the blankets. It was small and nondescript, but the way it was placed seemed deliberate, as though someone had left it there intentionally. "What's this?" she murmured, setting the puppy down gently. She opened the box, her breath catching as she saw its contents. Old photographs, letters, and what appeared to be a journal, its cover worn but intact. "Max, what have we stumbled onto?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The puppy whimpered again as though sensing her unease. Max sat beside her, his steady presence grounding her as she carefully lifted the journal from the box. The first page held a name written in shaky handwriting. Evelyn Carter. Sarah's heart raced. Evelyn Carter was a name she hadn't heard in years. A woman who had disappeared from the town decades ago, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and whispered rumors. "This can't be real," Sarah said, flipping through the pages. Each one was filled with Evelyn's thoughts, her handwriting growing more frantic and desperate as the entries progressed. The final page simply read, "They'll never find me. I have to disappear." Sarah stared at the journal in her hands, her mind racing with questions. Evelyn Carter's disappearance had been the talk of the town for years, a mystery that had never been solved. Some believed she had run away to escape a troubled past, while others whispered darker theories, abduction, foul play, or something more sinister. But now, holding Evelyn's words in her hands, Sarah felt as though she had stumbled upon a piece of the puzzle no one knew existed. She glanced at Max, who sat alert beside her, and then at the trembling puppy at her feet. "What is this, Max?" she murmured. "Why would Evelyn's journal be here? And why this puppy?" Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of rustling leaves outside the shed. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. The forest had been eerily silent, but now the noise grew louder, closer, as if someone, or something, was approaching. Max sprang to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his throat as he positioned himself protectively in front of Sarah. She clutched the journal tightly, her breath shallow. "Who's there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. The rustling stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. Sarah's eyes darted to the shed door, which hung slightly ajar, casting a narrow beam of light onto the floor. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, but curiosity and fear held her in place. After a long moment, the silence was broken by a man's voice, deep and gravelly. "Is someone in there?" Sarah's stomach flipped. She couldn't tell if the voice was friendly or threatening, but she knew she didn't want to be found. She pressed herself against the wall, her hand on Max's collar to keep him from charging. The door creaked open wider and a figure stepped into the light. It was an older man, his face weathered and his clothes stained with dirt. He carried a large walking stick, which he leaned on heavily as he peered into the shed. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Sarah exhaled slowly, standing but keeping a firm grip on Max. "I could ask you the same thing," she said, her voice firm but wary. "This shed doesn't look like it belongs to anyone." The man chuckled dryly, his eyes scanning the room. "It belongs to the woods now," he said. "But I used to know the person who spent time here. A woman named Evelyn." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Evelyn Carter?" The man nodded, stepping further into the shed. "That's right. She came out here often back before she disappeared. I don't know what she was hiding from, but this place gave her some kind of peace. Strange to find someone else here now." Sarah hesitated, debating whether to tell him about the journal and the box. "I found something," she said finally, holding up the journal. "It looks like it belonged to her." The man's eyes widened as he approached. "After all these years?" he muttered. "Where was it?" "Under the blankets," Sarah said, gesturing toward the corner. "And there's more, letters, photos. It's like someone left them here on purpose." The man crouched by the box, his hands trembling slightly as he sifted through its contents. "She always carried these with her," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "She said they were the only things she couldn't leave behind. I always wondered why she disappeared so suddenly." "Did you know her well?" Sarah asked, her curiosity growing. The man nodded slowly. "She was a kind soul, but she carried a lot of pain. She never talked about her past, but you could tell it haunted her. I tried to help, but one day she just vanished. No note, no goodbye. People thought she ran off to start fresh somewhere, but I always felt there was more to it." Sarah knelt beside him, her eyes on the journal. "Do you think this will tell us the truth?" Before the man could answer, the puppy let out a sharp bark, drawing their attention. It had moved closer to the box, pawing at something beneath the blankets. Sarah reached out, pulling the fabric aside to reveal a small tin canister, rusted with age but still sealed tightly. "What's this?" she murmured, picking it up. The man's eyes narrowed. "I don't know," he said. "But if Evelyn left it here, it must be important." With a trembling hand, Sarah opened the canister. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. She carefully unfolded it, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm sorry. I had no choice but to leave. I couldn't keep running and I couldn't stay. They'll find me if I do. Take care of her, she's all I have left." Sarah's heart pounded as the words sank in. "Take care of her?" she repeated aloud. Was she talking about this puppy? The man shook his head, his expression grim. "No," he said softly. "She must have been talking about someone else, her daughter." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Her daughter?" she whispered, clutching the note as if it might slip away. The words echoed in her mind, each one adding weight to the mystery of Evelyn Carter. She turned to the man, her voice trembling. "Did Evelyn have a child?" "Nobody ever mentioned that." The man's face was clouded with both sorrow and uncertainty. "I heard rumors years ago," he admitted. "But nothing concrete. Evelyn was a private woman. If she had a daughter, she must have gone to great lengths to keep her hidden." Sarah looked at the puppy now curled up beside Max. It seemed unlikely that Evelyn had been referring to the tiny dog, but the note had made one thing clear. Someone or something had been left behind. Why would Evelyn leave her daughter behind? Sarah wondered aloud. And who were they, the ones she was running from? The man shook his head, leaning heavily on his walking stick. "I don't know," he said. "But if Evelyn trusted you to find this, maybe you're meant to uncover the truth." Sarah swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The journal, the photos, the letters, each one felt like a piece of a puzzle she hadn't asked to solve but couldn't ignore. There has to be more, she said, her determination growing. If Evelyn left all this behind, maybe she left something else, something that explains what happened to her. She turned her attention back to the shed, her eyes scanning every corner for clues. The wooden walls were lined with cobwebs, and the floor was littered with debris, but something about the far wall caught her eye. A loose plank, slightly ajar, seemed out of place in the otherwise tightly constructed shed. "Help me with this," Sarah said, motioning to the man. Together, they pried the plank free, revealing a small compartment hidden within the wall. Inside was a weathered envelope, its edges frayed with age. The name Evelyn was scrawled on the front in delicate handwriting, but it wasn't her own, it was addressed to her. Sarah opened the envelope carefully, revealing a stack of photographs and another letter. The photos were black and white, showing a young woman who was unmistakably Evelyn holding a baby in her arms. In each photo, Evelyn's expression was both joyful and anxious, as though she were constantly looking over her shoulder. The letter was equally haunting. Written in neat, precise handwriting, it read, "Evelyn, you can't keep running. They'll find you no matter where you go. For her sake, you need to let her go. Leave her somewhere safe where they won't think to look. It's the only way to protect her. If you love her, you'll do what's right." The letter was unsigned, but its message was chilling. Sarah's hands shook as she lowered the paper. "Someone knew she was in danger," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And they told her to leave her daughter behind." The man leaned over her shoulder, his expression dark. "This wasn't a choice she wanted to make," he said grimly. "Whoever wrote that letter must have known how desperate she was." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. The pieces of the story were beginning to fall into place, but they only raised more questions. Who was Evelyn running from? And what had happened to the daughter she had tried so hard to protect? "We need to take this to the authorities," Sarah said, standing abruptly. "If Evelyn's daughter is still alive, she deserves to know the truth." The man hesitated, his grip tightening on his walking stick. "You're right," he said finally. "But be careful. If Evelyn was running from someone dangerous, this could still stir up trouble." As Sarah gathered the evidence, Max barked sharply, drawing her attention. The puppy had wandered to the door of the shed, its ears perked and its body tense. Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed through the forest, growing louder with each passing moment. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. "Is someone out there?" she whispered, clutching the journal and photos tightly. The man stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he gripped his walking stick like a weapon. "Stay behind me," he said. "We don't know who, or what, is coming." The footsteps stopped just outside the shed, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the door creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the shadows. The figure stepped into the shed, their face obscured by the shadows of the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. Sarah instinctively stepped back, her heart pounding as Max barked protectively at her side. The man beside her tightened his grip on his walking stick, ready to act if necessary. "Who's there?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling but firm. The figure hesitated for a moment before stepping fully into the light. It was a woman, her face weathered but striking, with sharp eyes that darted between Sarah, the man, and the box of items on the floor. Her presence carried an air of authority, but there was something about her posture, wary yet familiar, that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. "I should be asking you the same thing," the woman said, her voice low and deliberate. "What are you doing here?" Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet the woman's gaze. "I could ask you the same thing," she countered. "This shed doesn't belong to anyone. We found it by accident." The woman's eyes flicked to the journal in Sarah's hands, then to the photos and letters spread out on the floor. Her expression tightened. "That's not just junk," she said, her tone sharpening. "Where did you get it?" Sarah hesitated, debating how much to reveal. "It was here when we arrived," she said carefully. "It seems to have belonged to Evelyn Carter. Do you know her?" The woman's jaw clenched and she looked away briefly as if struggling with her next words. "I knew her," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But that doesn't explain why you're digging through her things." "She disappeared," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Everyone thought she just left town, but this journal and these letters say otherwise. She was running from something, someone, and she had a daughter. Do you know what happened to her?" The woman's eyes flashed, and for a moment she seemed torn between anger and something softer. Fear, maybe, or regret. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't your business." It is now, the man interjected, his voice steady. If Evelyn trusted someone to find this, it's because she wanted the truth to come out. You clearly know something and it's time you start talking. The woman sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. You don't understand, she said. The people Evelyn was running from, they're dangerous. Digging into this could get you hurt. It almost got her killed. Sarah's breath caught. What do you mean, almost? She didn't just disappear, the woman said, her voice heavy with emotion. She was taken. By the same people she was running from. She left her daughter behind to protect her, but it wasn't enough. They found her and they made sure she couldn't come back. The weight of the revelation hung in the air, suffocating and unbearable. Why? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What did they want from her? The woman hesitated, glancing at the journal. Evelyn knew something she wasn't supposed to, she said finally. Something about a powerful group in town. She uncovered their secrets and they couldn't risk her exposing them. She tried to run but they always catch up. Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process the information. And her daughter? She asked. What happened to her? The woman's face softened slightly, and for the first time, her expression held a glimmer of hope. She survived, she said. Evelyn left her with someone she trusted, someone far away from this mess. She did everything she could to make sure they'd never find her. Sarah looked down at the journal in her hands, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and determination. Evelyn's story can't end like this, she said. If her daughter is still out there, she deserves to know the truth about her mother. And the people who did this, her voice faltered, but her resolve remained strong. They need to be held accountable. The woman met Sarah's gaze, her expression unreadable. You don't understand what you're up against, she said. But if you're serious about this, you'll need more than what you've found here. Then help us, Sarah said. You knew Evelyn. You know the risks. If you have any idea who these people are or how to find them, we need to know. The woman was silent for a long moment, the weight of her decision evident in her tense posture. Finally she nodded. There's more, she said. But it's not safe here. If you want answers, meet me tomorrow at the old train station. Come alone, and don't tell anyone else. With that, she turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving Sarah and the man standing in the shed, the echoes of her warning lingering in the air. What now? The man asked, his voice cautious. Sarah looked at the journal, then at Max, who stood alert by her side. We follow the trail, she said. Whatever Evelyn was running from, it's time the truth came out. The next day, Sarah found herself at the edge of the old train station, a relic of the town's past that had long since fallen into disrepair. The air was thick with tension, the building's decayed structure casting eerie shadows in the fading light. Max was at her side, his ears twitching at every sound, while the journal and letters were safely tucked into her bag. You sure about this? The man from the shed had asked her earlier that morning, his tone heavy with concern. No, Sarah had admitted, but if Evelyn's daughter is out there, she deserves to know the truth. And if the people who hurt Evelyn are still around, they need to be stopped. His warning echoed in her mind as she stepped cautiously into the station, her footsteps crunching on the cracked tiles. Stay close, Max, she whispered, her hand resting on his leash. The dog's tail was low, his body tense as he scanned the surroundings. The woman from the shed was already there, leaning against a rusted pillar. She looked up as Sarah approached, her sharp eyes narrowing. You came, she said simply. Good. I'm here for answers, Sarah replied. Not games. The woman smirked faintly but nodded. Fair enough. Let's get to it. She motioned for Sarah to follow her deeper into the station, away from prying eyes. They stopped near a boarded-up ticket counter, where the woman turned to face her, her expression serious. Evelyn's story isn't just about her, she began. It's about power, and how far people will go to protect it. The group she was running from, they weren't just some small-time criminals. They had influence, money, connections. They controlled everything from local politics to law enforcement. And Evelyn, she stumbled onto their secrets. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of secrets? She asked. Corruption, illegal deals, people disappearing, things no one was supposed to know about, the woman said. Evelyn found evidence. She thought she could expose them, bring them down. But they found out before she could act. She went to the shed to hide, Sarah guessed, her mind piecing together the fragments of the story. But they still found her. The woman nodded grimly. She left the journal and the box as a backup plan. If something happened to her, she wanted someone to know the truth. She trusted that eventually, someone like you would find it. Sarah's heart ached at the thought of Evelyn, desperate and terrified, leaving behind everything she had to protect her child and uncover the truth. "And her daughter?" she asked. "You said Evelyn left her somewhere safe. Where?" The woman hesitated, her gaze dropping for the first time. "She left her with a family in another state. A couple she trusted to raise her as their own. As far as I know, the girl is still alive, grown now with no idea who her real mother was." Sarah's chest tightened. "She has to know," she said. "If Evelyn sacrificed everything for her, she deserves to know the truth." The woman sighed. "It's not that simple. Telling her could put her in danger. The group Evelyn was running from, they're still out there. They've gone underground, but they haven't disappeared. If they catch wind that someone is digging into Evelyn's past, they'll come after you, and her." Sarah looked at Max, who sat alert beside her, his unwavering presence giving her strength. "I'm not afraid of them," she said firmly. "Evelyn trusted someone to find this, and now it's my responsibility to see it through. I won't let her story end in silence." The woman studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then you need to know what you're up against." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder, its edges worn. "This is everything I know about the group, names, places, connections. It's not much, but it's a start." Sarah took the folder, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me with this. Just be careful," the woman warned. "These people don't play fair. If you're not careful, you could end up like Evelyn." As Sarah left the station, the weight of the folder in her bag felt heavier than the secrets it contained. The stakes had never been higher, but she couldn't turn back now. With Max at her side and Evelyn's story driving her forward, she knew she had to find the truth, no matter the cost. Later that evening, she spread the folder's contents across her kitchen table, her heart pounding as she read the names and notes scrawled on the pages. Each one was a thread, leading to a web of corruption that had ensnared Evelyn and countless others. "This is bigger than I thought," she whispered, her resolve hardening. "But I'm not giving up." As the night deepened, Max lay at her feet, his quiet presence a reminder of the loyalty and courage that had brought her to this moment. Together, they would uncover the truth and ensure Evelyn's sacrifice was not in vain. The next few days were a whirlwind of research and sleepless nights. Sarah pored over the folder's contents, piecing together the puzzle of Evelyn's past. The notes were cryptic, filled with coded references to shadowy figures and secret meetings. One name stood out repeatedly: Horizon Group. It was mentioned in connection with property deals, campaign donations, and even missing persons reports. The more Sarah uncovered, the clearer it became. This group wasn't just powerful, they were untouchable. Max lay beside her as she worked, his quiet presence grounding her amid the storm of revelations. "Horizon Group," Sarah muttered, tapping the name on one of the documents. "Who are you and why were you so afraid of Evelyn?" Her search led her to the town's archives, a dusty, seldom visited room in the basement of the library. With Max waiting patiently outside, Sarah sifted through old newspapers and property records, her fingers smudged with ink. She found several mentions of Horizon Group, all linked to massive land acquisitions that had displaced entire neighborhoods. But one article stopped her cold. It was a front-page story from 25 years ago, featuring a photo of a younger Evelyn standing outside her modest home. The headline read, "Local woman accuses developer of corruption, case dismissed." Sarah scanned the article, her heart racing. Evelyn had publicly accused Horizon Group of forging documents to seize her property. She had claimed to have proof, but the case had been thrown out on a technicality. Shortly after, Evelyn had disappeared. "They silenced her," Sarah whispered. "And now they're trying to erase everything she knew." That evening, Sarah shared her findings with the man from the shed, who had insisted on helping despite her protests. They spread the documents and articles across her kitchen table, the weight of the evidence tangible. "This isn't just about Evelyn," Sarah said, her voice steady. "It's about everyone who's ever stood in their way. If we don't stop them, they'll keep doing this." The man nodded, his expression grim. "But we can't do it alone. If these people are as dangerous as they seem, we need to be smart about how we move forward." Sarah agreed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The more she dug, the closer she came to uncovering the truth, and the more likely it was that someone would try to stop her. Her fears were confirmed a few nights later. She was reviewing documents late into the evening when Max began to growl, his ears pinned back. Sarah froze, listening. The faint crunch of footsteps outside her house sent a chill down her spine. Someone was there. "Stay here, Max," she whispered, grabbing her phone and a flashlight. She crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. A figure stood just beyond the porch, their face obscured by the shadows. "Who's there?" Sarah called, her voice trembling but firm. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they turned and disappeared into the night, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves in their wake. Sarah locked the door, her heart pounding. She knew she couldn't ignore the warning. Whoever had been outside wasn't there by chance. They knew what she was doing. She called the man from the shed, her voice urgent. "They know I'm onto them," she said. "I need help." "I'll be there in 10 minutes," he replied without hesitation. By the time he arrived, Sarah had packed up the documents and hidden them in a secure spot. Max barked sharply as the man entered, his presence reassuring despite the tension in the air. "We need to move quickly," the man said. "If they're watching you, it's only a matter of time before they act." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm not backing down," she said. "Evelyn deserves justice, and her daughter deserves to know the truth." The man placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression serious. "Then let's finish this," he said. "Together." As they began planning their next steps, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead. The Horizon Group had silenced Evelyn once, but they wouldn't silence her. With Max by her side and the truth within reach, she was ready to face whatever came next. The following morning, Sarah and the man from the shed set their plan into motion. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, they knew they needed to confront Horizon Group head-on. But first, they had to ensure Evelyn's daughter, the key to everything, was safe. The thought of putting her in harm's way weighed heavily on Sarah, but she couldn't let Evelyn's story go untold. "I'll take the documents to someone who can protect her identity," the man said, his tone resolute. "You focus on Horizon. Find out who's pulling the strings." Sarah nodded, her jaw tightening. "Be careful," she said. "Whoever they sent last night won't stop with just a warning." With that, the two parted ways, Max staying at Sarah's side as her constant companion and protector. She drove to the town's business district, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her destination was Horizon Group's headquarters, an imposing glass building that loomed over the surrounding streets like a fortress. Inside, the atmosphere was cold and clinical. The receptionist, a polished woman with an air of practiced indifference, barely glanced up as Sarah approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice clipped. "I need to speak with someone about a matter of great importance," Sarah said, keeping her tone calm but firm. "It concerns Evelyn Carter." The receptionist's eyes flickered with recognition before she quickly masked it. "I'm sorry," she said smoothly. "I'm not familiar with that name." "You should be," Sarah said, leaning closer. "Because I have evidence that connects this company to her disappearance." The receptionist hesitated, her polished exterior cracking slightly. "One moment," she said, picking up the phone. After a brief, whispered conversation, she motioned to a security guard. "Someone will see you shortly. Please wait in conference room B." Sarah followed the guard down a long, sterile hallway, Max trotting obediently at her side. Conference room B was a minimalist space with a large table, sleek chairs, and no windows. Sarah's stomach churned as the door clicked shut behind her. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before the door opened again. A man in an expensive suit entered, his presence commanding and unnerving. He introduced himself as Mr. Grayson, a senior executive at Horizon Group. "What can I do for you, Ms.?" He paused, waiting for her to fill in the blank. "Sarah," she said. "And you know exactly why I'm here. Evelyn Carter. I have her journal, her letters, and evidence of your company's involvement in her disappearance." Grayson's expression didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed," he said smoothly. "Horizon Group operates within the bounds of the law. Whatever you think you have, it's nothing more than speculation." Sarah leaned forward, her pulse pounding. "It's not speculation," she said. "I know about the forged documents, the land grabs, and the people who vanished after crossing you. Evelyn wasn't the first and she wasn't the last. I've already shared what I found with someone who can expose all of it." Grayson's mask of professionalism slipped, revealing a flicker of irritation. "You've made a grave mistake coming here," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Max growled low in his throat, the sound breaking the tense silence. Sarah met Grayson's gaze, her resolve unshaken. "Neither do you," she said. "I won't stop until Evelyn gets justice." Grayson stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Sarah," he said. "I suggest you think carefully about your next move." As Grayson left the room, Sarah's hands trembled, but her determination burned brighter than ever. She knew she had rattled him, but she also knew she was now a target. Gathering her things, she left the building with Max at her side, her mind racing. When she returned home, the man from the shed was waiting, his expression grim. "You stirred the hornet's nest," he said, holding up his phone. "I've been getting calls from blocked numbers all day. They know we're onto them." Sarah nodded. "Good," she said. "That means they're scared. But we need to move fast. If we're going to bring them down, we have to do it now." That night, Sarah and her ally worked tirelessly, compiling everything they had into a comprehensive file. They sent copies to trusted journalists and local authorities, ensuring the information would be impossible to suppress. But as they worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Max's ears perked up several times, his body tense as he growled softly at the windows. Each time, Sarah froze, her eyes scanning the shadows for movement. She knew Horizon Group wouldn't go down without a fight, but she also knew she couldn't stop now. "We're so close," she whispered, looking at Max. "Just a little longer." The following morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. She grabbed it, her heart racing as she saw a flood of messages and missed calls from the journalists she had contacted. The first message she opened read, "We're running the story. This is huge, stay safe." Her stomach churned. The file they had sent out was working, but it also meant that Horizon Group would be desperate to contain the fallout. She turned to the man from the shed, who was already scanning the news on his phone. "They're covering it," he said, his voice a mix of relief and tension. "But this is only the beginning. If Horizon knows you're the source, they'll come after you." Sarah nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. "Let them," she said. "I'm not running." Just as she finished speaking, Max barked sharply, his body rigid as he stared at the front door. Sarah's blood ran cold. She motioned for the man to stay quiet and grabbed a heavy flashlight from the counter. Slowly she approached the door, her breath shallow. A loud knock shattered the silence. "Miss Sarah," a voice called from the other side. "This is the police. We need to speak with you." Sarah exchanged a glance with the man. "Do you believe them?" she whispered. He shook his head. "Not until we see some badges." Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door slightly, keeping the chain latched. Two officers stood on the porch, their expressions stern. "We've received reports of suspicious activity," one of them said. "May we come in?" "What kind of reports?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but cautious. "Ma'am, this isn't a request," the officer said, his tone hardening. "Open the door." Max growled low, his teeth bared, and Sarah's suspicion deepened. Something about their demeanor felt wrong, too forceful, too rehearsed. "If you're real police, you won't mind waiting while I call the station to confirm," she said, closing the door slightly. One of the officers stepped forward, his hand on the doorframe. "That won't be necessary," he said sharply. "Open the door now." Before Sarah could respond, the man from the shed appeared at her side, a phone pressed to his ear. "I'm on the line with the police chief," he said loudly. "If you're legit, you won't mind proving it." The two officers exchanged a glance, their facade cracking. Without another word, they turned and walked briskly to an unmarked car parked down the street. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched them drive away. "That wasn't the police," she said, her voice shaking. "No, it wasn't," the man replied grimly. "Horizon's sending their goons now." Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "We have to finish this," she said, "before they silence us for good." By midday, the first wave of news coverage about Horizon Group broke across major outlets. Headlines detailed decades of corruption, including land grabs, forged documents, and ties to missing persons. Evelyn's story was front and center, her journal entries and letters painting a vivid picture of the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her daughter. As the story gained traction, Sarah received an unexpected call from one of the journalists. "We've uncovered something else," the voice on the line said. "Evelyn's daughter, she's alive. And we've tracked her down." Sarah's heart leapt. "Where is she?" "She's in a nearby city," the journalist said. "But there's more. She knows about the story. She wants to meet you." That evening, Sarah drove to the arranged meeting spot, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. Max sat beside her, his presence calming her racing thoughts. She didn't know what to expect, but the thought of meeting Evelyn's daughter filled her with equal parts hope and fear. At a quiet cafe, Sarah finally saw her. The woman, now in her early 30s, bore a striking resemblance to the photos of Evelyn. Her expression was a mixture of curiosity and guarded emotion as she stood to greet Sarah. "You're the one who found her things?" the woman said softly. "My mother's journal?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Yes. And I'm so sorry for everything she went through. She loved you more than anything, she did everything to protect you." The woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I never knew her, but I always felt like something was missing. Thank you for finding her." As they spoke, Sarah shared everything she had learned about Evelyn's fight against Horizon Group. The woman listened intently, her resolve hardening as the conversation progressed. "They need to be held accountable," she said. "For her. For everyone they've hurt. They will be," Sarah promised. "The truth is out now. They can't hide anymore." The confrontation with Horizon Group reached its peak when authorities raided their headquarters, armed with the evidence Sarah and her ally had uncovered. Key members of the organization were arrested, their sprawling web of corruption laid bare for the world to see. Evelyn's story became a symbol of courage and sacrifice, inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Her daughter, now armed with the truth, began working to honor her mother's legacy, helping those who had been affected by similar corruption. As Sarah returned to her quiet life with Max by her side, she felt a deep sense of peace. Evelyn's fight was over, but her story had left an indelible mark on the world. In her sacrifice, she had ensured that her daughter, and countless others, could live free from fear. And as Sarah sat by the window that evening, watching Max sleep peacefully at her feet, she knew she had done the right thing. Evelyn's voice, preserved in the pages of her journal, would never be silenced again.